Welcome to Writer's Life, an ongoing conversation with writers, authors, and folks in the publishing industry. I'm your host, Marvel Harrison, Publishing Director, Mimbres Press of Western New Mexico University. It's a pleasure to share a conversation today with Kathryn Goodwin Tone, a writer, former teacher, and the author of the novel, The King's Broad Arrow. Welcome to Writer's Life, Kathryn.
Thank you, Marvel. It's great to see you.
It's really wonderful to have you here. And, I'm really curious about your transition in life. I know you've lived lots of interesting places. You've been an educator, and how you transitioned into being a writer and then ultimately into an author.
Well, I did start out, I studied journalism at Penn State, but then I moved to Germany after graduating and didn't pursue writing for quite some time. It was not in my thoughts at that time to ever write a novel. And I did a little bit of, articles and things along the way, but I just didn't start my book until 2013. And the inspiration for it came from a class that I had taught when my own kids were in elementary school about introducing kids to philosophy. And it was just really interesting and fun. And I kind of wanted to continue along those lines, but in a different medium. And that's what inspired my book, which is historical fiction. It incorporates history. It takes place during the first 2 years of the American Revolution. So there's history in there, there's philosophy, there's some life lessons that I wanted to impart to young readers. There's mostly real historical figures, but then a few fictional figures to make the story go along.
Well, good. Just so that our audience sees, this is a copy of your lovely book. And how did you come up with the King's Broad Arrow title?
Well, I knew that I wanted the character to be from what is now Maine, and it wasn't technically Maine until 1821. And then the setting during the time and setting was already, established. So when I started doing research into what was happening in New England at the beginning of the American Revolution, I came across this topic of the Broad Arrow laws, which regulated a big section of the timber industry. And that was probably the main import from that part of the country, the colonies. And it basically said that any tree of a certain dimension, it had to be an eastern white pine, was kind of the property of the Royal Navy before anybody else could, possibly use it. And they would mark these trees with a simple triple slash mark, and that symbol is the King's Broad Arrow. It's also used to mark cannons and uniforms, anything that belonged to the Royal Navy. So that was just a great discovery, because the original title of the book was completely different. But when I started learning all that was the new title of my book, and it's so fascinating. And it became a good mechanism for the beginning and end of the story and the symbol.
Oh. Well, the protagonist in your story really allows for an engaging entity for anybody interested in history, especially the Revolutionary War. And how did you meet the protagonist in your own mind and heart?
I mean, how did I develop him?
Yeah. How did you come to know him?
He just as I wrote him, I came to know him.
Okay.
There wasn't much that I had planned ahead of time. And I will be perfectly honest that I wrote the novel as I went along. It sort of wrote itself sometimes. I didn't have it all planned, which I would change that I will change that for the next novel, because I think it makes it a lot more time consuming. But yeah, he just emerged, really. And I knew what I wanted him to go through, and I knew kind of how he would have to start and how he would end up. And so that journey shaped him, and yeah, he just sort of came out the way he was supposed to.
Oh, good. Well,
Hmm.
he really, it's very engaging, and
Thank
I
you.
think it's a terrific novel, and congratulations. And you've
Thanks.
already alluded to another one and or another manuscript of some sort, but I'm interested in the difference. You said I wouldn't do it the same way.
So the King's Broad Arrow, I really just wrote it as I went along. I didn't have an ending planned, and I ended up changing the original draft significantly because it was too long for my target audience, and so that meant I had to change the ending. I thought it was done, and then realized no, it's not done. So you know when it's done. You definitely do. It's a moment, and so. But what I did that was really time consuming was I did a lot more work, a lot more research than I needed to do. But in the end, if you get a story that's what you want it to be, and you're telling the story that you want to tell, including making it historically accurate. I think you start out with this much information, and then it filters down into what you actually use in the book. But so that's time consuming, but it's also gives you a deeper knowledge of what you're trying to convey.
Well, I think it comes across really wonderfully in your writing about how connected you were to all of the information. So, how much traveling, how much delving into specific places did you do?
Honestly, I lived in Germany when I was writing the book, so I only had one trip to the United States, and it wasn't. I did a little bit of research, but a lot of that section, I went to Boston, that had already been written, so it was more of a chance just to see for myself. And of course, 1776 Boston is a little bit different than modern Boston, but it was still great to be able to find some places, and actually walk, where he walked and where he escaped to and hid. And but otherwise I did everything from books and from online, and I used a lot of old maps. And so I didn't do that much hands on the ground or on the ground research.
But
But
I mean, it's so exciting that we have access to all of those things now. No matter what your
mm,
topic is, a person has the ability to really, I mean, I've seen writers spend a lot of time on Google Maps, just
yes,
going through, making sure they have the neighborhoods the way they need and want them to be. And
that absolutely. And I was able to figure out whether it was, if he made a journey on foot from point A to point B, was it realistic that a 14-year-old could do this in 24 hours, like walk that far? And yeah, it's great to have that kind of stuff right at your fingertips.
yeah. Well, how do you see your novel being utilized in terms of, I can see it as part of a curriculum. I know it wasn't written, to be in a curriculum per se, but how do you see it being engaged with young readers?
I would love to see it as part of a curriculum, because that was one of my primary goals in writing it, was to convey to young readers, or all readers really, this extraordinary time period in the beginning of the war. I think that over time we've sort of mythologized the American Revolution. At least that was my experience in elementary school, and that we've been taught that it was, a spontaneous, unanimous sort of event, and it wasn't. It was civil war. There was a lot of people that were, I mean, it was divided, and there were a few moments that were really critical in bringing people along to the idea of complete separation from England. So I hope that that's what the book shows, and it's hard to, in a book that size, to show the whole span of human history. But what I was trying to also illustrate was we are the first country to be founded on a set of you know, ideals, like abstract concepts. Other countries are formed by shared geography, shared language, shared culture. So yeah, to form a country based on principles had never been done, and it was pretty audacious. And also to show kids that, or all readers, that it was very touch and go, especially in the beginning. You know, there were a few moments that could have made or broke the whole thing. And bringing in some of the more pivotal characters, obviously George Washington, probably the most important. So that's really an important part of learning about the founding of our country. I think it's as much about the development of the ideas as, you know, the dates and battles and people, but showing the ideas that drove this movement. I think valuable.
Right. What you say really strikes me in that part about how we've romanticized the Civil War. Is that fair? You know, I mean, there's
The
been,
American Revolution.
pardon me, the American Revolution, but in terms of it, as you say, it's a civil war. I mean, it was not
Yes, it was a civil war.
right. And that we miss the pieces, I think, sometimes historically when we're reflecting back on it, of the angst and the tremendous tensions that were held in the different parts of who people were. And I think that one of the reasons it's so important to not have a romanticized sense of that time is maybe because of what we're going through now in terms of when people are talking about the civil distress and the challenges on democracy at this point. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about, you know, alignments of how just our learning history maybe helps us in some way.
Absolutely. I think the more you know about history, the more, you know, parallels that you see. I mean, patterns repeating themselves. And that was so crystal clear in writing this book, because you know, so much of what spurred the revolution was the ideals of the Enlightenment. You know, skepticism for traditional authority, trusting science, you know, moving away from divinity and moving more towards rational thinking, and the belief that all of those things will push the human race forward to a better place. But we're still having those discussions, you know. I mean,
Right.
vaccinations.
What you just said could have been a current op-ed.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in some ways it's a little discouraging, but then I also think it helps you to understand current events so much better if you realize we've kind of been through this before, hopefully learn from our mistakes. Yeah, there was violence then, absolutely. There was a lot of violence. There was, country was very polarized, or sides were polarized, so lots of similarities.
I mean, the language you're even using is, you know, what we're reading about currently on a daily basis. And it helps me understand that the people, the places you were writing about then had to have had some of that same sense of in their human condition. You know, that it wasn't really clear cut what the next steps were and how things had to go. And
Yes.
sometimes history is presented, in my estimation, in such a trite manner of here's the facts and here's the date and here's the time. And you presented it in this eloquent historical novel. It's like, it was so, I've said it before, engaging, but it also was so helpful in that part of understanding the strife of what anybody in that time was probably experiencing.
And that's exactly the protagonist, Sam. That's his entire journey, is from being highly skeptical on a personal level, and then on a, you know, in personal level, of that this could possibly be done, that they could accomplish this. And it's great to go back to that feeling, I guess, or to say, no, we can still be that country that these amazing people envisioned. And of course, there's so many contradictions, with the principles of the revolution and what actually happened. And slavery, obviously, is the biggest one. But recognizing that it's an imperfect process, it's not just add water and create a democracy, and it doesn't work that way. It's a constant struggle. It's like anything that has value. You keep working at it, and you try not to give up on it.
And that's what you did with your novel. You kept working at it.
I did.
You changed the ending, and now you're looking forward. Can you give us any glimpse as to what is on your mind or in your heart now about another project?
Yes, my next book, I am going to follow the King's Broad Arrow with the sequel, but that's not what I'm working on right now. What I'm working on right now is historical fiction biography of Adrienne Lafayette, the wife of the Marquis. Incredible woman, and I think it's not a stretch to say that if it weren't for her, the revolution could have turned out differently, because Lafayette was so key to bringing the French on with guns and support and financial support. So if she had not supported her husband unconditionally, things might have gone differently. And then if you fast forward to the French Revolution, she held their family together while he was in prison. She herself was in prison. It's an incredible story of just faith and resilience and love, and good lesson for our times, I think. How she thought her life was going to turn out, it was completely different, but yet she never really gave up, and she stuck to her value system. And
it sounds
she was
very
so brave.
Yeah, very courageous, very wonderful. And what a wonderful topic to choose. Not as I'm looking forward to a sequel to the King's Broad Arrow, but I think another tale of such a strong, dynamic woman is going to be really exciting to read.
Her story has just been in my heart for a long time, so I just want to get it out there in the world. Hope that I do her justice. I have her picture right here up on my desk.
Good. Well, in our final moments, do you have any suggestions, recommendations of authors or particular books for people? I think it's interesting to hear from writers.
Well, if you're interested in American history, one of my favorite writers who brings together so many different kind of topics, but he's just so talented, is Tim Egan. And I just saw him this morning. I was watching a documentary about the Dust Bowl, and he wrote an amazing book called The Worst Hard Time. But he writes several of his books focus on environmental episodes or events, and then brings in the social, economic, political consequences. So he's just a great all around. You learn so much in every one of his books. And what else? I mean, tons of books, obviously, about the revolution. Those are all on my website if anyone wants to dig in a little further.
Well, it's been a joy to speak with you today, Kathryn, and thanks to everyone who's joined us. I'm Marvel Harrison. From all of us at Mimbres Press, may your day be sparked with curiosity and wonder. See you again on the next Writer's Life.
Thank you.